The spring air carried the sweet smell of blooming roses through the royal palace gardens. Queen Elizabeth walked slowly along the stone pathway, her elegant blue dress flowing behind her. Today was different from her usual royal duties. Today was the annual charity event she hosted every year to help children in need. Hundreds of important people filled the beautiful gardens. Diplomats in expensive suits talked quietly near the fountain. Business leaders laughed over glasses of champagne. Everyone seemed to know exactly what to say and how to act. The Queen had seen these same faces at countless events before. But something caught her eye near the children's play area. A man was kneeling on the grass, completely ignoring his formal clothes getting dirty. He wasn't talking to other adults like everyone else. Instead, he was helping a small girl who had fallen and hurt her knee. The Queen stopped walking and watched. The man had gentle hands as he cleaned the little girl's scrape. He pulled out a colorful band-aid from his pocket, not the plain kind, but one with cartoon animals on it. The girl's tears stopped, and soon she was giggling at something he whispered to her. "Your Majesty," her personal assistant whispered urgently, appearing beside her. "There's been a mistake with the guest list. That man over there doesn't belong here. He's not on our approved list." Queen Elizabeth looked at the man again. He was now showing the little girl how to make a paper airplane from a napkin. Other children had gathered around him, all laughing and clapping as the plane soared through the air. "What's his name?" the Queen asked, still watching. "David Thompson, Your Majesty. He works with refugee families." Apparently, there was a mix-up with the invitations. "Our office meant to invite David Thornton, the banker." The Queen watched as David helped another child reach a low tree branch to pick a flower. His smile was real, not the practiced smile she saw on most faces at these events. When was the last time she had seen someone look genuinely happy at one of her parties? "Should I have security escort him out quietly?" her assistant asked. "No," the Queen said firmly. "Leave him be." As the afternoon continued, Queen Elizabeth found herself stealing glances at David. While other guests talked about stock markets and political strategies, he sat cross-legged on the grass, teaching children simple magic tricks with coins and handkerchiefs. The children adored him. Even some of the serious adults had stopped their conversations to watch his impromptu show. The Queen's official duties kept her busy for the next hour. She gave her speech about helping children around the world. She posed for photographs with important donors. She shook hands and made polite conversation about weather and recent news. But her mind kept wandering to the man who seemed so comfortable just being himself. Finally, she found herself walking toward the children's area. Most of the kids had been taken home by their parents, but David was still there, helping the palace gardener pick up scattered toys and decorations. "You don't have to do that," Queen Elizabeth said. Approaching him, David looked up, surprised. He had been so focused on cleaning up that he hadn't noticed her coming. For a moment, he seemed confused about who was talking to him. "Oh, it's no trouble at all," he said, standing up and brushing grass off his knees. "The children had such a wonderful time. It's the least I can do." The Queen studied his face. He looked tired, but it was the good kind of tired, like someone who had spent the day doing something meaningful. There were grass stains on his jacket, and his hair was slightly messy from playing with the children. "I heard you work with refugee families," she said. David's eyes lit up. "Yes, I do. We help families who have had to leave their home countries. We try to make their transition easier, find them safe places to live, help children get into schools, teach adults new job skills." "That must be challenging work." "It is," David admitted. "But it's also the most rewarding thing I've ever done. These families have been through so much. When you see a child smile for the first time in months, or when a father gets his first job in a new country, those moments make everything worth it." The Queen found herself genuinely interested in his stories. David told her about a young mother who had learned to speak English by reading children's books to her son. He described an elderly grandfather who had started a small garden behind their temporary housing, growing vegetables from seeds he had somehow saved from his homeland. "You carry band-aids with cartoon characters," the Queen observed, remembering. what she had seen earlier. David laughed and pulled the small pack from his pocket. Children respond better to something colorful and fun. Fear makes everything worse when you're hurt. A little bit of joy helps the healing process. As they talked, the Queen realized that David had no idea who she was. He spoke to her like she was just another person at the event, someone genuinely interested in hearing about his work. He didn't use fancy words or try to impress her. He just shared his experiences with honest enthusiasm. The sun was starting to set, casting golden light across the garden. Most of the guests had already left, but David and the Queen continued their conversation by the rose bushes. He told her about the challenges of helping families navigate complex legal systems. She found herself sharing her own frustrations about feeling helpless when she read about suffering in the world. "Sometimes I wonder if what I do really makes a difference," David said quietly. "The problems are so big, and I'm just one person. But you helped that little girl today." The Queen pointed out, "You made those children laugh. You're giving families hope for better futures. That's not small at all." David looked at her with surprise. "You were watching?" "I was," she admitted. "It was the most genuine thing I've seen in a long time." As the evening grew darker, palace staff began lighting the garden lamps. The Queen knew she should return to her other responsibilities, but she didn't want this conversation to end. David had reminded her why she had wanted to help people in the first place. Before her life became filled with endless formal ceremonies and political considerations, "I should probably go," David said, noticing the staff preparing to close the event. "Thank you for listening to me talk about my work. It's rare to meet someone who truly cares about these issues. Perhaps we could continue this conversation sometime," the Queen said, surprising herself with her boldness. David smiled. "I'd like that very much." As he walked away, the Queen's assistant approached her again. "Your Majesty, shall I make sure his name is removed from all future guest lists?" Queen Elizabeth watched David's figure disappear into the darkness beyond the garden gates. For the first time in years, she had met someone who saw past titles and formalities to focus on what really mattered: helping others and spreading kindness in a world that often felt cold and complicated. "Actually," she said to her assistant, "make sure he receives proper invitations to our future events. There was no mistake today." Sometimes the best discoveries happen when we least expect them. That night, as Queen Elizabeth prepared for bed, in her grand palace chambers, she couldn't stop thinking about the man who carried cartoon band-aids and made children laugh. She had spent years surrounded by people who wanted something from her: political favors, business connections, social status. But David had simply wanted to share his passion for helping others. For the first time in a very long time, the Queen fell asleep looking forward to tomorrow. 3 weeks passed after the garden party, and Queen Elizabeth found herself thinking about David more than she expected. Every royal duty felt heavier than before. Every formal dinner conversation seemed empty compared to their talk about helping refugee families. She had lived her entire life surrounded by people who spoke carefully, choosing words that meant nothing real. Then came the invitation to the museum opening. David's name was on the guest list, just as she had requested. The Queen arrived in her official car, waved to the small crowd outside, and walked through the museum halls looking at ancient artifacts. But her real attention was searching for one particular face. She found him standing quietly in front of a display about families who had fled their countries throughout history. He was reading every word on the information plaques, completely absorbed in the stories of people who had lost everything, but still found ways to rebuild their lives. "Interesting exhibit," Queen Elizabeth said, approaching him casually. David turned and smiled when he recognized her. "It really is. These stories remind me so much of the families I work with today. The challenges haven't changed much over the centuries. People still need safe places to call home, and they still have incredible strength when given a chance." They walked through the museum together, but this time their conversation went deeper. David told her about a grandmother he had helped who spoke 5 languages, but couldn't read in any of them. The woman had taught her grandchildren traditional songs from their homeland. while learning to write her name in English for the first time at age 70. She cried when she signed her first official document, David said, not from sadness, but from pride. She said it felt like claiming her place in a new world while honoring her old one. Queen Elizabeth listened to every word. In her world, documents were just papers to sign. But David helped her see how a simple signature could represent hope, dignity, and belonging for someone who had lost everything familiar. As weeks turned into months, they began meeting at different events around the city. David never asked for special treatment or recognition. He simply continued doing his work while the Queen found excuses to attend charity functions and community gatherings where their paths might cross. One evening, at a fundraising dinner for children's education, they sat at the same table by coincidence. Other guests discussed business deals and vacation plans to expensive resorts. David quietly told the Queen about a young boy who had taught himself to read using comic books, because regular textbooks felt too overwhelming after the trauma he had experienced. We found him a tutor who uses storytelling to teach math and science, David explained. Now he wants to become a teacher himself someday. He says he wants to help other kids who feel scared about learning. The Queen realized that David saw possibilities where others saw problems, while politicians debated immigration policies in abstract terms. David worked with real people to create real solutions. His stories made her understand that behind every statistic was a human being with dreams, fears, and incredible resilience. Their friendship grew stronger, but it remained hidden from the media. Queen Elizabeth began making unannounced visits to small cafes where David sometimes went for lunch between his work appointments. She wore simple clothes and minimal makeup, trying to blend in like an ordinary person. The first time she sat across from him in a tiny coffee shop, David looked surprised. "Are you sure this place is appropriate for you? It's not exactly fancy." "It's perfect," she said, and meant it. The coffee was stronger than what she usually drank, and the chairs were mismatched. But she felt more relaxed than she had in years. No photographers, no protocol officers, no schedule dictating every minute of her time. David told her about his childhood as the son of immigrants, how his parents had worked multiple jobs to give him opportunities they never had. He described learning two languages at home and feeling caught between two cultures at school. His stories helped the Queen understand struggles she had never experienced, but needed to know about. "Sometimes I felt like I didn't fully belong anywhere," David admitted. "But that taught me how important it is to create spaces where everyone can feel welcome." In return, Queen Elizabeth began sharing her own feelings of isolation, though she was careful not to reveal too much about her royal life. She talked about the loneliness of having responsibilities that affected millions of people, and how difficult it was to form genuine friendships when everyone wanted something from her. "You treat me like a regular person," she told him one afternoon, as they walked through a public park. "Aren't you?" David asked simply. That question stayed with her for days. When had she stopped thinking of herself as just a human being who happened to have an unusual job? When had she started believing that her title was more important than her heart? Their meetings became the brightest part of Queen Elizabeth's week. David never asked about palace life or tried to get favors. Instead, he shared updates about the families he helped and listened when she talked about her hopes to make real differences in people's lives. One evening, as autumn leaves fell around them during a walk through quiet city streets, David stopped and looked at her seriously. "I need to tell you something," he said. "I've started looking forward to seeing you more than anything else in my life. But I feel like I don't really know who you are. You never talk about your work or your family. Sometimes I wonder if you're hiding something important." Queen Elizabeth felt her heart racing. She had been dreading this moment while also hoping it would come. David deserved honesty, but the truth would change everything between them. "What if I told you that my life is more complicated than most people's?" she asked carefully. "Everyone's life is complicated," David replied, "but complications don't scare me. What scares me is feeling like someone I care about doesn't trust me enough to be real with me." They stood under a streetlight, and Queen Elizabeth could see the genuine concern in David's eyes. He cared about her as a person, not knowing anything about her wealth or status. When was the last time someone had worried about her feelings, instead of worrying about pleasing her? "I do trust you," she said quietly, "more than I've trusted anyone in a very long time. But if I tell you the truth about my life, everything will change between us." David reached for her hand. Maybe change isn't always bad. Maybe some changes are worth the risk. As they walked back toward the main street, where her driver waited discreetly in an unmarked car, Queen Elizabeth knew that their relationship had reached a turning point. David was asking for honesty, and she was falling in love with someone who had no idea that loving her back would turn his quiet life upside down. That night, she lay awake in her royal bedroom, staring at the ornate ceiling and thinking about David's gentle hands and kind eyes. For the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to love someone not for what they could give her, but for who they were when no one important was watching. But she also knew that royal love stories rarely had simple happy endings. The photograph appeared on every newspaper front page the next morning. Queen Elizabeth and David walking hand in hand through the park, captured in a moment that looked intimate and romantic. The headline screamed in bold letters, "Queen's Secret. Love, royal romance rocks the kingdom." David stared at the newspaper in complete shock. His hands shook as he read the words over and over, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The woman he had been meeting for coffee, the person who listened to his stories about refugee families, the one who made him feel understood. She was the Queen of England. His phone started ringing at 6 in the morning and didn't stop. Reporters called from newspapers, television stations, and radio shows. They wanted interviews, comments, inside information about his relationship with royalty. David didn't answer any of the calls. He couldn't even process what was happening. Meanwhile, at the palace, Queen Elizabeth sat in an emergency meeting with her advisors. The room felt cold and formal, exactly the opposite of the warm conversation she had shared with David in quiet cafes. "Your Majesty, this is a disaster," said her chief advisor, pacing back and forth. "The phone hasn't stopped ringing. Every major news network wants a statement. The Prime Minister is asking for an immediate meeting." "What are they saying?" Queen Elizabeth asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "The headlines are challenging. Some newspapers are calling it a fairy tale romance, but others are questioning your judgment. They're digging into his background, looking for anything controversial." Queen Elizabeth felt sick to her stomach. David didn't deserve this attention. He had never asked to be part of her world, never wanted fame or recognition. He just wanted to help families and make the world a little bit better. "Have they found anything problematic about him?" she asked. "No, Your Majesty. His record is completely clean. He volunteers at food banks on weekends, has never been in trouble with the law, pays his taxes on time, and everyone who knows him speaks very highly of his character." But that's not stopping them from creating stories. By noon, television crews had gathered outside David's apartment building. Neighbors who had never spoken to him before were suddenly giving interviews about what kind of person he was. Most said kind things, but the constant attention made it impossible for him to leave his home. A reporter knocked on his door every few minutes. When David finally answered once, hoping they would leave him alone if he made a brief statement, the questions came fast and harsh. "How long have you been secretly dating the Queen? Are you hoping to marry into royalty for money and status? What do you think qualifies you to be with someone of her position? Do you think a commoner like you deserves a royal relationship?" David tried to explain that he was just a regular person who did humanitarian work, but his words were twisted in the news reports. Headlines made it sound like he was boasting about his relationship or demanding special treatment. The worst part was the comments from people online. Some supported their right to find happiness together, but others wrote cruel things about David's background and appearance. They called him a fortune hunter and said he was trying to take advantage of the Queen's loneliness. Queen Elizabeth read every negative comment and felt responsible for the pain they were causing David. She tried calling his phone multiple times, but he didn't answer. She understood why answering might have meant more photographers somehow getting pictures of their conversation. 3 days after the story broke, David finally managed to leave his apartment. By sneaking out through the building's service entrance, he needed groceries and couldn't hide forever. But even at the small market where he usually shopped quietly, people recognized him and stared. The store clerk, who had always been friendly before, now seemed nervous and formal. Other customers whispered and pointed. David felt like he was living in a fishbowl where everyone was watching and judging his every move. That evening, Queen Elizabeth made a decision that surprised everyone at the palace. She announced that she would attend a charity event for refugee families, the same cause that David worked for. Her advisors begged her to cancel, saying it would only fuel more speculation about their relationship. "I'm going," she said firmly. "This cause is important, and I won't let gossip stop me from supporting the work that matters." The charity event was supposed to be a small gathering, but when news broke that the Queen would attend, media crews surrounded the building. David had planned to go because it was part of his regular work, but now he faced an impossible choice. If he attended, the media would go crazy. If he stayed away, it might look like he was abandoning the families he had promised to help. He decided to go, but arrived early through a back entrance, hoping to avoid the cameras. For 2 hours, he worked quietly with refugee families, helping translate documents and filling out paperwork for housing applications. This was the work he loved, the reason he got up every morning. When Queen Elizabeth arrived, she was surrounded by security and photographers. But instead of staying in the formal reception area with other officials, she walked directly to where David was working with the families. "Don't stop what you're doing," she told him quietly. "This work is more important than any media attention." For the next hour, they worked side by side, helping families navigate complicated forms and translating between languages. The cameras captured everything, but something beautiful happened. The refugee families, who had been nervous about all the attention, relaxed when they saw the Queen and David working together. Naturally, an elderly woman who spoke limited English managed to tell the Queen, through David's translation, that she was grateful for people who cared about families like hers. A young father shook both their hands and said their help meant his children would have a better future. As the evening ended, Queen Elizabeth and David walked toward the exit together. Reporters shouted questions, but neither of them answered. They had spent the evening doing meaningful work, and that felt more important than any headlines. Outside, as camera flashes lit up the dark street, Queen Elizabeth turned to David. "I'm sorry this happened to you. You never asked for any of this attention." David looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since learning who she was. "I'm not sorry I met you," he said quietly, just loud enough for her to hear over the shouting reporters. "But I need time to figure out what this all means." The Queen nodded, understanding completely. David's quiet life had been turned upside down overnight. He needed space to decide whether loving her was worth the price he would have to pay. As they parted ways that night, both of them knew that their relationship had reached a crossroads. The world was watching now, waiting to see whether a queen and a humanitarian worker could find a way to love each other. Despite the enormous differences in their worlds, the fairy tale had become real, but real life was much more complicated than any storybook ever admitted. 2 weeks had passed since the charity event, and Queen Elizabeth hadn't heard from David. Every morning, she woke up hoping for a phone call or message that never came. Her days were filled with official duties, but her mind was always wondering what he was thinking and feeling. The palace had become a fortress of activity. Her advisors scheduled meeting after meeting to discuss the situation. They brought charts showing public opinion polls and newspaper clippings from around the world. Some countries thought the romance was wonderful. Others questioned whether a queen should be dating someone without royal blood. "Your Majesty, we need to address this directly," said her main advisor during one particularly tense meeting. "The silence is creating more speculation. People are making up stories because they don't have facts." Queen Elizabeth sat quietly, listening to their plans for damage control. They wanted her to make a public statement saying that she and David were just friends working together for charity. They had written speeches about her dedication to duty above personal happiness. "What if I don't want to deny anything?" she asked, surprising everyone in the room. The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Her advisors exchanged worried glances. "Your Majesty," with respect. "This isn't just about what you want," her chief advisor said carefully. "There are constitutional considerations. The monarchy has traditions that have existed for centuries, and maybe some of those traditions need to change," Queen Elizabeth replied, her voice stronger than before. That evening, alone in her private chambers, the Queen did something she rarely allowed herself to do. She cried, not the dignified tears of a monarch at solemn ceremonies, but the messy, heartbroken tears of a woman who had finally found love and might lose it because of circumstances beyond her control. Meanwhile, David was facing his own struggles. He had taken time off from his regular work because reporters still followed him everywhere. His small apartment felt like a prison. He couldn't go to his favorite coffee shop or take walks in the park without cameras appearing. But the hardest part wasn't the media attention. It was the doubt that crept into his mind during the long, quiet hours. Did Queen Elizabeth really care about him? Or had he been just an interesting distraction from her royal responsibilities? How could someone like him fit into her world of palaces and protocol? His phone rang constantly with job offers from newspapers wanting him to write about his royal romance. Television producers offered him money to appear on talk shows. Publishing companies wanted him to write a book about dating the Queen. He turned down every offer, but the requests kept coming. One evening, while David sat in his apartment reading letters from refugees he had helped, his doorbell rang. He almost didn't answer, expecting another reporter. But when he looked through the peephole, he saw his elderly neighbor holding a plate of homemade cookies. "I brought these for you," she said when he opened the door. "I know this has been a difficult time." David invited her in for tea, grateful for normal human conversation. As they sat together, she told him something that surprised him. "I've been reading about you in the newspapers," she said. "All these reporters talking about whether you're good enough for the Queen. But they're asking the wrong question." "What do you mean?" David asked. "They should be asking whether she's good enough for you." His neighbor said with a gentle smile, "I've watched you for 3 years. You help everyone in this building. You carry groceries for people who can't manage alone. You never make noise or cause problems. You're kind, hardworking, and honest. Any woman would be lucky to have you, Queen or not." Her words stayed with David long after she left. He had been so focused on wondering if he belonged in the Queen's world that he had forgotten his own worth. He was a good person who made real differences in people's lives. That mattered more than royal bloodlines or ancient traditions. The next morning, David made a decision. He called his supervisor and asked to return to work. When reporters gathered outside the refugee center where he volunteered, he walked past them without comment and went inside to do his job inside. He found families who had been waiting for his help. A mother needed assistance with school enrollment, forms for her children. An elderly man wanted help writing a letter to his son in another country. These people's needs didn't stop because of newspaper headlines. As David worked, he felt like himself again. This was who he was, someone who solved problems and helped people build better lives. The media storm would eventually pass, but this work would always matter. That same day, Queen Elizabeth received a letter that changed everything. It came from a young refugee girl who had met both her and David at the charity event. The letter was written in careful English, with some words spelled wrong, but every sentence full of heart. "Dear Queen Elizabeth," the letter began, "Thank you for helping my family. When I saw you and David working together, I felt happy because it showed me that important people can be kind people too. My mother says you are lucky to have someone who cares about families like us. She says love is more important than being fancy. I hope you can be happy because you helped make my family happy." Queen Elizabeth read the letter 3 times, tears falling onto the paper. A child who had lost everything understood something that her advisors couldn't see. Love and kindness mattered more than protocols and traditions. That evening, the Queen called an emergency meeting with her constitutional advisors. But this time she had a different agenda. I want to know exactly what the law says about my personal relationships, she announced, not traditions or customs or what people think I should do. I want to know what the actual legal requirements are. Her advisors spent hours explaining constitutional law. The surprising truth was that there were fewer legal restrictions than anyone had assumed. Most of the rules about royal marriages were traditions that could be changed, not laws that had to be followed. What you're suggesting would be unprecedented, her chief advisor warned. Good, Queen Elizabeth replied. Maybe it's time for some unprecedented changes. Late that night, the Queen sat at her private desk and wrote a letter by hand, not a formal royal communication, but a personal note from one human being to another. She wrote about missing their conversations, about understanding why he needed time to think, and about her growing certainty that some things were worth fighting for. She didn't send the letter immediately. Instead, she placed it in her desk drawer and made plans for something even more unprecedented. If David needed to see that she was serious about choosing love over convention, she would show him in a way that left no doubt about her priorities. The next morning, Queen Elizabeth's personal secretary received unusual instructions. The Queen wanted to visit the refugee center where David worked, not for an official royal engagement, but as a volunteer. No photographers, no formal ceremonies. Just her offering to help with whatever work needed to be done. As she prepared for this unofficial visit, Queen Elizabeth felt nervous and excited in equal measure. She was about to do something that would shock her advisors and probably create new headlines. But for the first time in months, she felt completely certain about her choice. Love, she had decided, was worth the risk. David was helping a family fill out housing applications when someone whispered that an unexpected visitor had arrived at the refugee center. He looked up from the paperwork and couldn't believe his eyes. Queen Elizabeth stood at the entrance, not in her usual formal clothes, but wearing simple jeans and a sweater. No cameras followed her. No security guards stood nearby. She looked nervous but determined. I came to volunteer, she announced to the surprised staff members. I'd like to help however I can. David watched as she approached the reception desk and asked what tasks needed to be done. The center director, still shocked by her presence, stammered something about organizing donated clothes and helping with meal preparation. Queen Elizabeth nodded and rolled up her sleeves. For the next 3 hours, David watched the Queen of England sort through boxes of children's clothing, serve soup to families, and sit on the floor playing simple games with refugee children who had no idea they were giggling. With royalty, she worked without complaint, asked no special favors, and focused completely on helping others. When a little boy spilled juice on her sweater, she just smiled and helped him clean up the mess. When an elderly woman needed someone to listen to her worries about her sick grandson, Queen Elizabeth sat beside her and held her hand while the woman spoke in broken English, mixed with her native language. David realized he was seeing the real person behind the crown. This was who she truly was when nobody was watching and nothing was expected of her, except basic human kindness. As the afternoon ended, David and Queen Elizabeth found themselves working together to clean up the children's play area. They worked in comfortable silence, both thinking about everything that had happened between them over the past few months. You didn't have to come here, David said quietly, picking up scattered toys. Yes, I did, Queen Elizabeth replied. I needed you to see that this matters more to me than any palace or protocol. These people, this work, what we do together, it's real in a way that most of my life isn't. David stopped cleaning and looked at her directly. I've been thinking about us constantly, about whether someone like me could ever fit into your world. What if I told you that I don't want you to fit into my world? Queen Elizabeth said. What if I want to build a new world that fits both of us? That evening, they talked honestly. For hours, not in a hidden cafe or secret location, but sitting in David's small apartment. sharing takeout food and speaking from their hearts. Queen Elizabeth told him about the legal research she had done, about her conversations with constitutional experts, and about her growing certainty that love mattered more than tradition. David shared his fears about losing his privacy and independence, but also his realization that running away from love because it was complicated would be the biggest mistake of his life. "I love who you are," he told her, "not your title or your wealth or your status. I love the woman who remembers the names of refugee children and cries when she reads about families in need. I love how you see possibilities instead of just problems. And I love the man who carries cartoon band-aids and makes children laugh when they're scared." Queen Elizabeth replied, "I love how you treat everyone with equal respect, whether they're homeless or royal. You've taught me what it means to be genuinely useful." 6 months later, their wedding made history. Instead of a traditional royal ceremony in a grand cathedral, they chose to marry in the community center where they had both volunteered. The guest list included heads of state sitting next to refugee families, diplomats sharing tables with social workers, and children who had been helped by both David and Queen Elizabeth serving as flower girls and ring bearers. The ceremony itself reflected their shared values. Instead of expensive flowers, they decorated with artwork created by children in the refugee programs. Instead of a traditional wedding cake, they served desserts made by women in the center's job training program. The wedding favors were small donations made in each guest's name to humanitarian organizations around the world. When the minister asked if anyone objected to the marriage, a small voice from the children's section called out, "They're both really nice people who help families. Why would anyone say no?" The laughter that followed was genuine and joyful. During their first dance, Queen Elizabeth whispered to David, "No regrets, only one." He whispered back, "I wish we had met sooner." Their honeymoon was spent working together at a refugee camp in another country, establishing what would become their joint foundation for helping displaced families worldwide. Photographers captured images of them building temporary shelters, teaching children, and working alongside other volunteers. The pictures showed dirt under their fingernails and tired smiles on their faces, but also happiness that glowed from within. 1 year after their wedding, Queen Elizabeth and David were working in their foundation office when a group of young journalists visited to write a story about their unusual marriage. One reporter, barely out of college, asked the question everyone wanted answered, "Your Majesty, people are curious about your husband. When they ask who he is, what do you tell them?" Queen Elizabeth looked across the room at David, who was patiently explaining immigration procedures to a family who spoke limited English. She watched him use hand gestures and simple drawings to communicate, never showing frustration when understanding took time. "I tell them," she said with a smile that lit up her entire face, "he's the human I married." The reporter looked confused. "But what does that mean?" Queen Elizabeth thought about all the royal protocols she had learned, all the formal speeches she had given, all the careful answers she had provided throughout her life. Then she thought about David's gentle hands helping injured children, his patient work with scared families, and his ability to see the best in everyone he met. "It means," she said simply, "that in a world full of titles and positions and artificial importance, I found someone who remembers that we're all just human beings trying to do good things for each other. He doesn't love me because I'm a queen. He loves me because I'm a person. And I love him for the same reason." That evening, as they walked hand in hand through the refugee center, where they had first worked together, Queen Elizabeth reflected on how much her life had changed. She still had royal duties and official responsibilities, but now they felt meaningful because they were connected to real people with real needs. David had changed too. He had learned to navigate the complexities of public attention while staying true to his values. He used his new platform to bring global attention to humanitarian causes, but he still spent most of his time doing hands-on work with individual families. Together, they had created something neither could have built alone, a marriage that proved love could bridge any gap and a partnership that made both their worlds better. They had shown that sometimes the most revolutionary thing a queen can do is choose to be human first and royal second, and every night, as they fell asleep in their modest apartment above the Foundation office, surrounded by thank you letters from families they had helped, they knew they had made the right choice. Love, they had learned, wasn't about finding someone perfect. It was about finding someone who made you want to be the best version of yourself every single day.